The transport helicopter kicked up a cloud of snow as it descended onto the landing pad. Even from inside, I could tell how frigid it was going to be when those doors opened. The Antarctic wind howled against the metal frame, a warning of what waited outside. The pilot gave me a thumbs up as the rotors slowed, my cue to disembark. I pulled my hood tight around my face and stepped out into the gray Tuesday morning. The cold hit me like a physical force, stealing my breath despite the layers of specialized gear I wore. The research station stood about 50 yards away, a collection of interconnected modules that looked tiny against the vast white landscape stretching in every direction. A figure emerged from the main entrance and trudged toward me through the snow. He moved with the practiced gait of someone who'd done this walk countless times, hunched slightly against the wind but otherwise unbothered by conditions that had me already shivering. "David Miller," he called over the dying whine of the helicopter blades. "That's me," I shouted back, grabbing my equipment bag from where the pilot had dropped it. "Samuel Torres. Everyone calls me Sam." He didn't offer his hand, just gestured toward the station. "Let's get inside before you freeze." I followed him across the packed snow, my boots crunching with each step. The helicopter lifted off behind us, and I fought the urge to turn and watch it go. My last connection to the outside world disappearing. "First time in Antarctica?" Sam asked as we reached the airlock door. "Did my cold weather training in Alaska, but nothing compares to this." Sam nodded, punching a code into the keypad. "Nothing does." The outer door slid open, and we stepped into a small chamber. Once the door sealed behind us, warmth began to seep back into my extremities. Sam removed his outer gear methodically, hanging each piece on designated hooks. I copied him, noting how his movements were precise and efficient, nothing wasted. With our outdoor layers removed, I got my first good look at Sam Torres. He was older than me by maybe 15 years, with salt and pepper hair cut short and practical. Deep lines framed his eyes, the kind that come from years of squinting against snow glare. His dark eyes assessed me quickly, and I had the distinct feeling of being cataloged and evaluated. The inner door opened to reveal a corridor lit by fluorescent lights. The walls were metal, lined with pipes and wiring, function over form. "Main hub's this way," Sam said, leading me forward. "I'll show you around, get you settled in your quarters." We walked through a series of connected modules, each serving a different purpose. Sam pointed them out as we passed. "Dining area and kitchen. We take turns cooking. Nothing fancy, but beats the ready meals they used to send us." He gestured to a room with several tables. "Common room through there. Got some books, games, movie collection. Communication center next to it. Weekly check-ins with home base. Emergency protocols. Your lab is in the east wing. Living quarters in the west." I tried to mentally map the layout as we moved. The station was larger than it appeared from outside, a maze of corridors connecting specialized rooms. "How many people are stationed here?" I asked, noticing how empty the place felt. "Just us now. Had 4 until recently. Down to 2 until they send replacements." Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. His face had hardened, but he continued walking before I could ask more. We reached what would be my lab, a space filled with equipment for analyzing ice core samples. My research on ancient atmospheric conditions trapped in Antarctic ice was why I'd signed up for this 2-month assignment. The lab was well equipped, with newer machinery than I'd had access to at my university. "All yours," Sam said. "Previous researcher kept it organized. Should have everything you need." "Previous researcher?" I asked. Sam's jaw tightened. "We'll get to that. Let's finish the tour." He showed me the rest of the facility with the same efficient pace. Storage areas, backup generators, medical bay. Throughout it all, I noticed how quiet the station was. The only sounds were the constant hum of ventilation systems and our footsteps echoing on metal floors. We ended at a small room in the west wing. "Your quarters," Sam said, pushing open the door. "Bathrooms shared, 2 doors down. Meals at 7, noon and 6. Between those times, you're on your own." The room was sparse but functional. A bed, desk, storage cabinet, and a small shelf with a few worn paperbacks left by previous occupants. A tiny window looked out at nothing but white landscape and gray sky. I set my personal bag on the bed. "Thanks for the tour." Sam didn't leave. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a laminated card. "Most important part of orientation right here." He handed me the card. It contained 6 typed rules. 1. Do not acknowledge figures in black suits outside the station. 2. Never work in the lab after dark. 3. Always wear protective equipment, even for simple procedures. 4. If music plays on the intercom system, find a locker or enclosed space immediately. 5. Do not go outside during snowstorms, regardless of what you hear. 6. Do not trust communications from other bases without verification. I read the list twice, waiting for Sam to crack a smile or tell me it was standard hazing for newcomers. His expression remained deadly serious. "What is this?" I asked, turning the card over to see if there was more information on the back. There wasn't. The rules, non-negotiable. I looked at the list again. This doesn't make any sense. Why would there be people in suits out here? And what's with the music warning? Sam crossed his arms. I don't expect you to understand yet. Just follow them. Is this some kind of joke the veterans play on new researchers? No joke. Sam's voice dropped lower. 3 weeks ago, a researcher named Marcus saw a man in a black suit standing out in the snow. Against my warning, he nodded at it. Friendly guy Marcus. Always wanted to make connections with people. The way Sam said it rather than him made me uncomfortable. The next day, Marcus went to check something at the atmospheric monitoring station. 500 yards. Should have taken 20 minutes. Never came back. He got lost in a storm, I suggested. No storm, clear day, good visibility. Sam tapped the laminated card in my hand. Search team found his tracks in the snow. They stopped abruptly, like he'd been lifted straight up. No sign of him since. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. Sam's face showed no hint of deception, only a grim certainty that made the hair on my neck stand up. These rules, they're about what happened to Marcus. They're about keeping you alive, Sam corrected. This isn't my first winter here. I've seen researchers come and go. The ones who follow the rules make it home. The ones who don't. He left the sentence unfinished. I wanted to argue, to point out how irrational this all sounded. Black-suited figures in Antarctica. Music on intercoms sending people into hiding. But the dead seriousness in Sam's eyes stopped me. I'm not trying to scare you, he continued, though his words were doing exactly that. This is a good facility. Important research happens here. But there are aspects of this place that don't make sense. Don't try to make them make sense. Just follow the rules. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Dinner's at 6. I'll see you in the dining area. After Sam left, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the laminated card. My scientific mind rebelled against everything he'd told me. There had to be rational explanations. Isolation-induced paranoia, shared delusions from the long Antarctic night, or simple misunderstanding of natural phenomena. Yet as I unpacked my belongings and organized my small living space, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place. The silence felt too complete, too heavy, the corridors too empty, and Sam's certainty about the rules too absolute to dismiss entirely. I placed the laminated card on my desk where I could see it. Maybe Sam was just being overly cautious after losing a colleague. Maybe there were environmental hazards specific to this region that had been simplified into these strange rules. Or maybe the isolation of Antarctica affected people in ways I didn't yet understand. As evening approached, I sat at my desk reviewing the research parameters for my project, but my eyes kept drifting to that card. Scientific curiosity warred with a growing unease. Part of me wanted to test these rules to prove they were unnecessary superstitions. Another part, a more primitive part, whispered that Sam had survived here for reasons I didn't yet grasp. The station's lights dimmed slightly, indicating the transition to evening hours. Through my small window, the Antarctic landscape had faded to deeper gray as the meager daylight waned. I got up to head to dinner, pocketing the laminated card. Whatever was going on here, I'd approach it methodically, like any other research question. Observe, gather data, form hypotheses. But as I walked through the quiet corridors toward the dining area, the tension that permeated the isolated station seemed to press in around me. Something about this place was wrong. I just didn't know what it was yet. I woke up around 5:30 after a restless night. Despite the exhaustion from yesterday's travel and orientation, my mind kept returning to Sam's warning and that strange laminated card. The 6 rules seemed out of place in a scientific research facility, more like superstitions than safety protocols. The small quarters felt even more cramped in the early morning light. I'd left my clothes laid out the night before, a habit from my university days when early lab sessions required maximum efficiency. After getting dressed, I pulled the card from my desk and read through the rules again. Rule number 1 stood out. Do not acknowledge figures in black suits outside the station. The whole thing seemed ridiculous in the light of day. Who would be wandering around Antarctica in business attire? I tucked the card into my pocket anyway. The corridor was silent as I made my way to the dining area. Sam sat at one of the tables with a mug of coffee and a tablet, reading something with intense focus. He looked up when I entered. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep much." I headed for the coffee machine. "Mind if I join you?" Sam gestured to the chair across from him. "Breakfast is simple. Oatmeal, protein bars, fruit. Help yourself." I fixed a bowl of oatmeal and sat down. We ate in silence for a few minutes before I decided to bring up yesterday's conversation. About those rules. "You'll follow them," Sam cut in. "Not a question, but a statement." "I will. I just want to understand them better." Sam put down his tablet. "Understanding isn't necessary. Following is." His tone made it clear the topic wasn't open for discussion. I finished my breakfast while Sam outlined my research objectives for the next 2 months. The ice core collection is extensive, Previous teams have mapped most of the samples by depth and approximate age. Your job is to analyze atmospheric composition, particularly the carbon markers. Got it. I'll start today. After breakfast, Sam walked me to the lab. Unlike yesterday's tour, he took time to show me the specific equipment I'd be using and the safety protocols. The preservation chamber maintains constant temperature for the ice cores, he explained, pointing to a large freezer unit along the back wall. Extraction equipment is over there. Computer station is set up with the analysis software. The lab was impressive, better equipped than what I'd had access to at my university. Large windows lined one wall, providing a view of the endless white landscape. The morning light cast long blue shadows across the snow. I'll be in the communications room if you need anything, Sam said. Remember, lab work only during daylight hours, I finished. I remember. Sam nodded and left me to my work. I spent the next few hours familiarizing myself with the equipment and reviewing the previous researchers' notes. The data collection was meticulous, with samples cataloged by depth, location, and estimated age. Some of the deeper cores contained air bubbles trapped over 20,000 years ago, windows into Earth's ancient atmosphere. Around midday, I took a break to stretch my legs. I walked to the window, rubbing my eyes after hours of staring at computer screens. The Antarctic landscape stretched out in all directions, a vast white nothing under a pale sky. The sun hung low even at midday, casting that strange directionless light unique to polar regions. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a shadow or a trick of light on the snow, but as my eyes focused, I made out a figure standing about 50 yards from the building, a person completely motionless. They wore a perfectly fitted black suit, no coat, no hat, no gloves, nothing to protect against the killing cold that waited outside. The figure stood perfectly still, facing the station, facing me. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. When I opened my eyes, the figure remained unchanged. Something about its stillness felt wrong, not the stillness of someone trying not to move, but the stillness of something that never needed to move at all. My first instinct was to wave. It seemed rude not to acknowledge another human being out here in the middle of nowhere. My hand even started to rise. Then Sam's voice echoed in my head. Do not acknowledge figures in black suits outside the station. I froze, my hand halfway up. The urge to wave or nod was almost overwhelming, like an itch I couldn't scratch. It felt physically painful to look at someone and not signal recognition. Marcus had nodded at one of these figures. Marcus was gone. I forced my arm back down and deliberately turned away from the window. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt sweat beading on my forehead despite the climate-controlled room. I moved back to my workstation and picked up a sample container, but my hands shook. I could feel it watching me. Though I kept my back to the window, the weight of its attention pressed against me. It was aware. It knew I had seen it. For the next hour, I tried to focus on my work, running basic analyses on ice samples and logging the results. Every few minutes I caught myself about to turn toward the window. Each time I stopped myself. The presence outside the window never diminished. In the early afternoon, I retrieved several core samples from the preservation chamber. The work was detailed and absorbing, requiring full concentration to avoid contamination. I became engrossed in the precise movements needed to extract the trapped air bubbles without altering their composition. Time slipped away as I worked. The rhythm of scientific procedure, always a comfort to me, gradually pushed the uneasiness to the back of my mind. I forgot about the figure outside. I forgot about Sam's warnings. I was just a scientist doing what I loved, analyzing samples that might help us understand Earth's climate history. It wasn't until I noticed the changing light that I looked up from my work. The lab had grown darker. The windows now showed only blackness outside. How long had I been working? I checked my watch. 6:20. I'd completely lost track of time. Rule number 2, never work in the lab after dark. As if triggered by this realization, a soft thud came from the back of the lab. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. The preservation chamber hummed steadily. The equipment sat silent. Another noise, this time a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. It came from behind the storage cabinets. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting it. No answer came, but the scraping sound paused briefly before continuing, louder now. I needed to leave, now. I remembered what Sam had told me about the rules. They weren't suggestions, they were survival. I began gathering my notes and shutting down equipment. The computer needed to complete its backup sequence before powering off. My hands moved faster as the sounds grew more distinct. Something metallic dragged across concrete. Then a hollow tapping, like knuckles on glass, from somewhere in the darkness at the back of the lab. The backup seemed to take forever. Another sound joined the others, a wet sliding noise that made my skin crawl. It moved from one side of the lab to the other, circling behind me. Finally, the computer finished its shutdown. I grabbed my notebook and headed for the door, trying not to run but moving as quickly as I could. The sounds followed, growing louder and more varied. The metallic scraping, the tapping, the wet sliding, And now something new, a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from the air itself. I reached the door and fumbled with the handle. Behind me, something heavy fell over with a crash. I didn't look back. The door opened, and I stepped through into the brightly lit hallway. The sound stopped immediately. The silence was so sudden it felt like a physical pressure had been released. I stood in the hallway, my back against the closed lab door, breathing hard. I waited for several minutes, but no sound came from inside the lab. Whatever had been in there either disappeared or went silent. I considered going back to check, then immediately dismissed the idea. Rule number 2 existed for a reason. The corridor stretched empty in both directions. I should have headed to the dining area for dinner, but my legs felt weak. I slid down until I sat on the floor, back still pressed against the lab door. My pulse gradually slowed, but the feeling of wrongness lingered. I don't know exactly how long I sat there, maybe 20 minutes before Sam appeared at the end of the corridor. He walked toward me with a steady, unhurried pace. When he reached me, he looked down at my position on the floor, then at the lab door behind me. "Lost track of time?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. Sam didn't ask for details. He didn't lecture me about the rules. He simply held out his hand to help me up, his expression showing a knowing recognition. He'd been here before, either himself or with other researchers who'd made the same mistake. "Dinner's ready," he said as I got to my feet. "You'll want to eat something." We walked in silence toward the dining area, leaving the lab and whatever had been inside it behind us. I still had the laminated rules card in my pocket. Now I understood. These weren't superstitions. They weren't jokes or initiation rituals. They were lessons learned through experience, possibly through blood. As we rounded the corner toward the dining area, Sam finally spoke again. "Tomorrow, set an alarm. Don't work past 4:30. I nodded, grateful for the practical advice rather than questions about what I'd heard. I didn't want to talk about it, and apparently, Sam didn't need me to. He already knew. "I will," I promised. "It won't happen again." Sam looked at me for a long moment. "Yes, it will. But next time you'll be faster." The following afternoon, I returned to the lab determined to make up for lost time. After what happened the previous night, I wanted to prove to myself and to Sam that I could handle the research demands of this station. I set an alarm for 4 o'clock like Sam suggested, placing it where I couldn't miss it. My work involved analyzing air composition from the ice cores, extracting gas samples trapped thousands of years ago. The process required careful handling and several chemical solutions to break down the ice without contaminating the ancient air bubbles. I moved methodically through each step, triple-checking my measurements before proceeding. Around 2 in the afternoon, my hand slipped while transferring one of the chemical solutions. The glass beaker tipped over, spilling its contents across the workbench and onto the floor. I cursed under my breath and immediately grabbed the emergency cleanup kit from beneath the sink. Sam had been adamant about safety protocols during my orientation. The lab contained various chemicals that could be harmful if mishandled. I pulled on thick rubber gloves and fastened the protective mask over my face before tackling the spill with absorbent pads. The mask felt tight against my skin, but I focused on containing the chemical before it could spread further. As I pressed the last absorbent pad against the floor, I noticed the airflow through my mask had changed. The breathing seemed restricted, coming in short, labored pulls. I stood up to adjust the seal around my face and felt a small tear in the rubber near the filter. The mask had malfunctioned. I pulled it away immediately, but not before taking several deep breaths of the contaminated air that had been seeping through the tear. My first thought was to get a replacement mask from the supply cabinet. I moved across the lab, already feeling lightheaded. The chemical wasn't immediately dangerous. It was meant for dissolving ice samples, not toxic enough to cause permanent damage, but inhalation could cause temporary side effects. I reached the supply cabinet and fumbled with the latch. That's when I noticed the walls seemed to be moving, not violently, but gently, like they were breathing. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. Just the chemical, I told myself, reaching again for the cabinet. The replacement mask was exactly where it should be. I pulled it out and secured it properly over my face, making sure the seal was intact this time. Fresh, filtered air flowed through, but the hallucinations had already begun. The walls continued their subtle pulsing. The white floor tiles shifted like ice flows. Most concerning were the shadows. They moved independently of their sources, sliding across surfaces with purpose rather than following the laws of physics. I gripped the edge of the workbench, anchoring myself to something solid. The logical part of my brain knew this was just a chemical reaction affecting my visual processing, nothing more. The effects would pass. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the lab, partially hidden by storage cabinets, stood a figure in a black suit. Unlike the one I'd seen outside, this one wasn't perfectly still. Its head tilted slightly as it watched me, the movement so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been staring directly at it. I knew it wasn't real. It couldn't be. The suited figures existed outside in the Antarctic waste, not inside the station. This was just my brain connecting my recent experiences with my current chemical-induced state. Sam's voice echoed in my head. Don't acknowledge them. Even though this was clearly a hallucination, the advice seemed relevant. I deliberately turned away and focused on the spill cleanup. The hallucination persisted in my peripheral vision. Every time I glanced in that direction, the figure remained, watching with that unnaturally tilted head. When I fully turned away, I could feel its gaze between my shoulder blades. I forced myself to continue working. The chemical needed to be properly disposed of, the surfaces thoroughly cleaned and neutralized. I kept my movements precise despite the way the room warped around me. The floor seemed to ripple with each step, and the ceiling occasionally dripped shadows that evaporated before hitting the ground. Just finish the cleanup, I muttered to myself. The effects will wear off soon. But the hallucinations intensified. The black-suited figure moved closer whenever I wasn't looking directly at it. When I turned back, it would be in a new position, always watching, always slightly closer. I began reciting chemical formulas in my head, focusing on the science I knew was real rather than the visions I knew were not. Carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, nitrogen oxide, NaNO. The mental exercise helped ground me as I worked. 2 hours passed this way, me cleaning and properly disposing of materials while fighting through increasingly vivid hallucinations. The suited figure remained the most persistent vision, appearing in different locations around the lab, but always watching with that same tilted head posture. Gradually, the walls stopped breathing. The shadows returned to their proper places. The floor solidified beneath my feet. By 4 o'clock, when my alarm went off, the hallucinations had mostly subsided. The figure in the black suit was the last to fade, lingering in the corner of the lab until I shut down my equipment and headed for the door. I left exactly at 4:30, grateful to escape the lab with its lingering memories of what I'd seen. The corridor felt reassuringly solid and normal. I headed straight for the shower room, where I spent 20 minutes under hot water, washing away any chemical residue that might have clung to my skin or hair. By dinner time, I felt almost normal again. My head ached slightly, and occasionally my vision would blur around the edges, but the worst had passed. I made my way to the dining area, where Sam was already setting out 2 plates of what looked like pasta. "How was the lab today?" he asked as I sat down. "Had a small chemical spill, nothing serious." He looked at me more closely. "You okay? You look pale." "Mask malfunctioned during cleanup. Breathed in some fumes." Sam's expression sharpened. "What happened?" I explained about the tear in the mask and the hallucinations that followed. I mentioned seeing the walls move and shadows behaving strangely, but hesitated before telling him about the suited figure. Something made me hold back that detail. "Should pass completely by morning," Sam said, pushing a glass of water toward me. "Drink plenty of fluids." We ate in relative silence. I found myself constantly scanning the dining area, half expecting to see the suited figure standing in a corner. The rational part of my brain knew the hallucinations had ended, but some primal instinct remained on high alert. Sam was telling me about tomorrow's supply inventory when it happened. The intercom system mounted on the wall suddenly crackled to life. A moment of static, then music began playing, a slow jazz tune with a mournful saxophone floating through the empty corridors. Rule number 4. If music plays on the intercom system, find a locker or enclosed space immediately. Sam moved with startling speed. One moment he was seated across from me, the next he had me by the arm, pulling me toward the kitchen area. "Move," he hissed, his grip painfully tight. I didn't question him. The urgency in his voice triggered my own fight-or-flight response. We hurried into the kitchen, past the refrigerator and stoves, to a tall supply locker in the back corner. Sam yanked the door open and pushed me inside among mops and cleaning supplies. He squeezed in after me, pulling the door shut. The space was barely big enough for both of us. We stood chest to chest in complete darkness, our breathing the only sound until Sam clicked on a small flashlight attached to his keychain. "What?" I started to whisper. "Quiet," Sam cut me off, his voice barely audible. Not a sound. The jazz music continued to play through the intercom, audible even inside our hiding place. The melody was old-fashioned, something that might have been popular in the 1940s. The notes wandered lazily through the empty station, creating an atmosphere both nostalgic and deeply wrong. Then came the footsteps. Heavy and deliberate, they moved through the dining area where we'd been sitting moments before. Not the sound of boots on metal flooring. These were different. They sounded wet, like bare feet slapping against the floor, but much heavier than any human could produce. Sam's eyes met mine in the dim light of the flashlight. His expression told me everything I needed to know. This was why we hid. This was what the rules protected us from. The footsteps paused. Something scraped across the floor, a chair being moved. Then another. Tables shifted. The sounds of our interrupted dinner being investigated by whatever was out there. A soft laugh drifted through the air. It started as something almost human, then twisted into something else, a sound no human throat could make. It rippled up and down impossible octaves, sometimes multiple laughs layering over each other despite coming from a single source. I pressed my back harder against the locker wall, as if I could somehow push through it. Sam remained perfectly still, his breathing controlled and silent. The tiny flashlight illuminated only our faces, leaving the rest of the small space in darkness. The footsteps moved again, coming closer to the kitchen. I held my breath. The jazz continued to play, the saxophone now joined by a piano that hadn't been there before. The music was changing, evolving as it played. Something heavy bumped against the kitchen counter. Glass clinked as objects were touched or moved. The footsteps circled the kitchen, coming terrifyingly close to our hiding place. For 45 minutes we remained in that locker while the entity moved through the station. Sometimes it seemed to leave the kitchen, its wet footsteps receding down the corridor, only to return minutes later. The laughter came intermittently, each time less human than before. The jazz music served as a constant backdrop, its melody growing more complex and dissonant as time passed. Notes that shouldn't have been possible on conventional instruments wove through the original tune. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the music stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No footsteps, no laughter, no movement at all. Sam held up his hand when I started to shift my weight, signaling me to remain still. We waited in that cramped locker for another 10 minutes, neither of us making a sound. My legs had gone numb from standing in one position for so long, but I didn't dare move. Finally, Sam clicked off his flashlight and carefully opened the locker door. He peered out, then stepped from our hiding place. I followed, wincing as blood rushed back into my cramped legs. The kitchen looked untouched. No sign of disturbance or intrusion. We moved carefully to the dining area. Our dinner plates sat exactly where we'd left them. The chairs were in their proper places. Nothing appeared to have been moved or touched. Yet we had both heard it. The footsteps, the furniture being shifted, the laughter. I looked at Sam, whose eyes were methodically scanning the room for any sign of what had happened. The next 2 days passed in tense quiet. After our experience hiding in the kitchen locker, Sam and I fell into a careful routine that minimized risk. I kept strict hours in the lab, never working past 4:30, and we both stayed alert for any unusual sounds or sights. The incident with the music had left me deeply shaken, though I tried not to show it. On the morning of the third day, I noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon while getting coffee. The Antarctic sky, usually a flat pale blue, had turned an ominous gray that seemed to press down on the station. "Storm coming," Sam said, appearing beside me at the window. "Big one." "How can you tell?" "The pressure dropped fast overnight. Wind direction changed." He tapped the weather monitoring display on the wall. "We'll be locked in by afternoon." I had read about Antarctic storms during my preparation for this assignment, but reading about 100-mile-per-hour winds was different from the prospect of experiencing them. Sam spent the morning securing external equipment and checking the emergency systems while I worked in the lab. By lunchtime, the wind had picked up considerably. The building creaked and groaned as powerful gusts slammed against it. Snow whipped past the windows in horizontal sheets, reducing visibility to just a few yards. I watched from the lab as the white landscape disappeared behind a wall of swirling snow. "I'd finish up early today," Sam advised when he stopped by. "Power can get unstable during these storms." I took his advice and wrapped up my work by 2. With nothing else to do and the storm intensifying by the hour, I grabbed one of the paperback books from my room and headed to the common room. The thick walls muffled most of the storm's fury, but I could still hear the wind howling around the building's edges. The common room was designed for comfort. Sofas, recliners, a television, and bookshelves filled with movies and books left by previous researchers. I settled into one of the armchairs near the heater vent and opened my book, a thriller I'd brought from home but hadn't started yet. The story failed to hold my attention. Every few minutes my eyes drifted to the windows, now completely obscured by snow and ice. The sound of the wind changed constantly, sometimes dropping to a low moan before rising to a screaming pitch that made the walls tremble. I tried to focus on my book, but the storm commanded my awareness. That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was just another variation in the wind's voice, a higher pitch that lasted a bit too long. But then it came again, clearer this time, a child's cry. I lowered my book, listening intently. The wind howled, metal fixtures creaked, and then, unmistakably, a young voice called out, "Help, please, someone help me." I sat up straight, my book forgotten on my lap. The voice came again, seeming to originate from the direction of the main entrance about 30 yards down the corridor. "I'm cold, please open the door." The voice belonged to a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. He sounded terrified, his words breaking with sobs that pierced through the storm's roar. My first instinct was to get up and check. What child could possibly be outside in an Antarctic storm? It made no sense, but the voice was so clear, so convincingly frightened. I rose from the chair and took 3 steps toward the corridor before stopping. Rule number 5 flashed in my mind: do not go outside during snowstorms regardless of what you hear. The rule hadn't specified voices. It hadn't mentioned children crying for help, but something in the phrasing, regardless of what you hear, suddenly seemed significant. "Please, I'm all alone, I can't feel my hands anymore." The boy's voice cracked with another sob. I stood frozen in the doorway of the common room, torn between the impossible reality of a child outside and Sam's warning about the rules. My eyes darted down the corridor toward the main entrance. It remained closed, secure against the storm. Maybe Sam had heard it too. Maybe he was already checking. I should find him first. I stepped back into the common room and grabbed the station radio from its charging dock. We each carried one for communication within the facility. "Sam, you there?" After a moment of static, his voice came through. "What's up? Do you hear anything unusual?" A pause. "Like what?" I hesitated. "Like someone outside, at the main entrance." The radio went silent for so long I thought he might have turned it off. Finally his voice returned, low and serious. "Where are you right now?" "Common room. Stay there. Don't go near the entrance. Don't respond to anything you hear." The radio clicked off. I stood clutching it, as the child's voice came again, louder now. "Someone's in there. I can see the lights. Please help me. I'm going to die out here." I sank back into the armchair, gripping the radio tightly. The voice was so real, so filled with authentic terror and desperation. How could I sit here and do nothing if there was even a slight chance someone was actually out there? But this was Antarctica. We were the only research station for over 100 miles. There were no settlements, no native populations, certainly no children. The logical part of my brain knew this, yet the emotional part responded to the genuine distress in that young voice. 10 minutes passed with the child's pleas growing more desperate. Then another voice joined in, an adult male, his tone authoritative but strained. "This is Dr. Lawson with the Norwegian research team. We have a medical emergency. Our transport crashed 2 miles south of your position. We have injured personnel including a child." I sat rigid in the chair. The man continued, giving details about their supposed crash, mentioning specific injuries, equipment they needed, coordinates of their location. His vocabulary was technical and specific, exactly what you'd expect from a researcher in an emergency situation. A third voice joined in, a woman this time, also claiming to be from the Norwegian team. She called out specific names, asked for specific medical supplies, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine tears. For over an hour, I sat listening to this impossible chorus of voices. They knew things they shouldn't have, station protocols, equipment types, even Sam's name at one point. They took turns pleading, demanding, reasoning, their strategies evolving as if they were learning what might work best to get someone to open the door. I clutched the radio like a lifeline, but Sam didn't call again. The voices continued their relentless campaign, sometimes fading as if moving away in despair, then returning with renewed vigor and fresh approaches. The child remained the most difficult to ignore. His cries grew weaker over time, his pleas more heart-wrenching. "Please, I can't feel anything anymore. Why won't you help me?" I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voice penetrated even that barrier. It wasn't just coming from the entrance anymore. It seemed to surround me, as if the child stood right beside my chair, whispering directly into my ear. "I know you can hear me. Why are you letting me die?" I grabbed my book and stumbled out of the common room, heading deeper into the station. The voices followed, seeming to come from every wall, every vent, every shadowed corner. I ended up in my quarters, sitting on the bed with my back against the wall, knees pulled up to my chest. The storm raged on into the night. The voices continued for hours, eventually fading as midnight approached. I didn't sleep. I sat awake, listening to the wind and wondering what would have happened if I had opened that door. Morning arrived with unexpected quiet. The storm had passed during the early hours, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. I emerged from my room, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, and found Sam in the dining area preparing breakfast. "Rough night?" he asked, noting my exhausted appearance. I nodded. "The voices, they can be persistent." He placed a mug of coffee in front of me. "First storm's always the hardest. How do you handle it?" "You get used to it." "Sort of." Sam poured himself coffee. "Eat something. Then I want to show you something." After a quick breakfast, Sam led me to the main entrance. He cycled the airlock and we stepped outside into the bright Antarctic morning. The storm had left massive drifts piled against the station walls, but the air was perfectly still now, the sky a clear, pale blue. Sam walked 10 feet from the entrance and stopped. "Look around. What do you see?" I surveyed the area carefully. Fresh snow covered everything, pristine and untouched except for the 2 sets of footprints we had just made. "Nothing," I answered. "Just snow." "Exactly." Sam pointed at the area directly in front of the main door. "If anyone had been out here last night, a child, a Norwegian research team, anyone, there would be signs, footprints, equipment, something." I stared at the perfect blanket of snow. There was never anyone there. Never. Sam's expression was grim. "But they sound real, don't they? They know things they shouldn't know. They say exactly what might convince you to open that door." We walked back inside. I felt sick thinking about how close I'd come to responding to those voices, how compelling their pleas had been. "What are they?" I finally asked as we removed our outer gear. Sam shook his head. "Questions like that don't help here. What matters is what happens if you break the rules." Later that afternoon, I was organizing data in the communications room when the radio console crackled to life. A voice came through the static, urgent and professional. "Emergency transmission to Antarctic Research Station 4. This is Northern Research Base 6. We have a situation requiring immediate assistance. Please respond." I hesitated, remembering the voices from the previous night. But this was different. An actual transmission through official channels, not voices outside the door. I moved to the console and pressed the response button. "This is Antarctic Research Station 4. We receive you. We have a critical failure in our containment system," the voice continued. "Hazardous chemical leak of compound XRN-77. We need immediate evacuation assistance. Our coordinates are 82.9 south, 56.7 east. Can you dispatch aid?" The transmission sounded legitimate, clear, professional, following proper protocols. I reached for the station map to check the coordinates against known research bases. "Station 4, do you copy? We have personnel exposed to the compound. Situation critical. Please confirm assistance." Something felt wrong. The voice was too smooth, the details too convenient. I remembered Sam's warning about verifying communications. "Stand by," I transmitted, getting authorization. I used my radio to call Sam, communications room, now. When Sam arrived a minute later, the voice was still transmitting requests for assistance, growing more insistent. "Chemical leak at Northern Research Base 6, I explained, pointing to the radio. "They're asking for evacuation help." Gave coordinates and details about the leak. Sam listened to the transmission for less than 10 seconds before reaching over and switching off the receiver. His face had hardened into an expression I was beginning to recognize, controlled anger masking fear. "There is no Northern Research Base 6, he said flatly. "What about the coordinates? 82.9 south, 56.7 east puts them in the middle of nowhere. No research station, no field camp, nothing." Sam tapped the console. "And compound XRN-77 doesn't exist at any Antarctic facility. It's not a real chemical designation." The implications sank in slowly. "It's them again, like the voices in the storm." Sam nodded. "They try different approaches. Sometimes it's voices outside, sometimes fake transmissions. They learn what works and what doesn't." He looked at me with that same intensity I'd seen when he first explained the rules. "They're persistent, and they're patient. What would have happened if we'd gone to those coordinates? We wouldn't have come back." Sam's answer was simple and certain. "No one ever does." The radio remained silent after Sam turned it back on. Whatever had been broadcasting the fake distress call had given up for now. I stared at the quiet console, wondering how many other attempts would come during my time at the station, how many different strategies these entities would try. Sam checked the systems to ensure the transmission hadn't triggered any automated responses or alerts. Satisfied that everything was secure, he prepared to leave the communications room. "Always verify," he reminded me. "Always check with me before responding to any transmission from another base. They sound convincing because they're designed to." I nodded, still staring at the silent radio. The calculated nature of these attempts was what disturbed me most. The voices outside had evolved their tactics over time. The radio transmission had used proper protocols and terminology. These weren't random phenomena, they were intelligent strategies. "They'll try again," Sam said from the doorway, reading my thoughts. "Different approach, different story. Always with the same goal. To get us to leave the station," I finished, "or to bring something inside." Sam's voice was quiet but firm. "Either way, we follow the rules, we survive." As my 2-month assignment at the station neared its end, the encounters grew worse. What had started as isolated incidents became a constant assault on our senses and sanity. I marked days off on my calendar with equal parts hope and dread. Hope that I would make it to extraction day, dread at what might happen before then. The first sign of escalation came exactly 10 days before my scheduled departure. I was analyzing data in the lab when I looked up and noticed something unusual outside the window. A figure in a black suit stood in the snow about 50 yards away, facing the station. This wasn't unusual by itself. I'd seen them before. What made me freeze was the second figure, standing 30 yards to the left of the first. Then I spotted a third and a fourth. I counted 7 of them in total, arranged in a loose semicircle around our building. Each wore an identical black suit. Each stood completely motionless. Each faced directly toward the station. I looked away immediately, remembering the first rule. 7 of them. There had never been more than one before. I continued working, fighting the urge to look again. When I finally did glance up an hour later, they remained in exactly the same positions. They stayed there all day, unmoving, undisturbed by the biting cold or wind. I told Sam about it over dinner. 7 at once, he said, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "That's new. Is it bad?" He set down his fork. It means they're getting more interested. In the station. In you. The way he said it made my stomach turn. Why me? You're leaving soon. They know that. Sam picked up his fork again. The rules work because they create boundaries. When boundaries change, like someone leaving, they get more active. Has this happened before? Every time. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes held something I'd come to recognize as controlled fear. Just follow the rules. 9 more days. That night, I woke to the sound of machinery humming. My watch read 3:27 in the morning. The sound came from the direction of the lab. I got out of bed and opened my door just enough to listen. The humming was rhythmic and mechanical, exactly the sound the ice core extraction equipment made during operation. But that equipment required manual activation through a complex startup sequence. It couldn't turn on by itself. Sam appeared in the hallway, fully dressed despite the hour. He moved with purpose toward the lab, pausing when he saw me. "Stay in your room," he said quietly. "Lock the door." I nodded and retreated, securing the door behind me. Through the wall, I could hear Sam moving toward the lab. The humming continued for several minutes, then abruptly stopped. A heavy silence followed. I sat on my bed waiting, counting minutes in my head. 23 minutes later, Sam's footsteps returned down the hallway. He knocked softly on my door. When I opened it, his face looked older than it had at dinner. "What happened?" I asked. "Everything in the lab was running. All of it. Every piece of equipment, even the backup systems. How is that possible?" "It's not." Sam leaned against the doorframe. "I shut everything down and disconnected the main power relay to the lab wing. We'll restore it in the morning." "What were they doing?" "The machines? Processing ice core samples, running analysis protocols." He paused. "Sending data." "Sending data where?" Sam just shook his head. "Get some sleep if you can. I'll stand watch." The next morning, we restored power to the lab and found nothing out of place. The equipment functioned normally under manual control. The data logs showed no record of nighttime operation or transmitted information. But we both knew what we'd heard. 2 days later, the intercom music started playing at odd hours. We'd hide in lockers or supply closets, listening to the wet footsteps moving through the station. The first time it happened during breakfast, another time while I was showering. Most alarmingly, it played 3 times during one 24-hour period, something Sam said he'd never experienced before. "They're testing the boundaries," he explained after our 3rd time emerging from hiding spots, "seeing how much we can take." "What if it keeps happening? What if it plays constantly?" "It won't. Even they have limitations." Sam checked his watch. 7 more days. The false communications became more sophisticated too. A voice claiming to be from my university called, saying my mother was in critical condition after a car accident. They had details no stranger should know. Her name, where she lived, even the car she drove. The voice asked me to confirm my identity so they could arrange emergency transport home. Another time, what sounded exactly like a military official contacted us about an approaching weather system with unprecedented destructive potential and ordered immediate evacuation to a backup facility at coordinates he provided. Each transmission contained specific details designed to create urgency, to make us act without thinking. Each time, Sam and I verified the information through separate channels and found nothing but silence on the other end. "They're getting better at it," Sam noted after we exposed a particularly convincing call about a containment breach at a nearby Russian station. More specific, more personal. 5 days before my departure, I woke to find my research notes rearranged on my desk. The papers had been sorted into neat piles, with certain pages placed on top, all the pages containing location data for where our ice core samples had been collected. That same night, I heard scratching inside the walls of my quarters. Soft at first, then louder, moving in circular patterns. The sounds continued for hours, stopping only when morning light crept under my door. 4 days before departure, we found every faucet in the station running simultaneously. No one had turned them on. 3 days before, the temperature control system malfunctioned, dropping interior temperatures to near freezing before Sam managed to override it manually. 2 days before I was scheduled to leave, the lights began flickering in patterns. Not random power surges, but deliberate sequences that repeated. Short, short, long. Short, short, long. Like something trying to communicate. Sam's face grew more lined with each incident. He slept less, checked and rechecked security protocols, made sure our radios were always charged. He'd been through this before, but never, he admitted, with such intensity. "They want something," he said on my second to last night, both of us sitting in the common room with mugs of cooling coffee. "Something specific." "What?" "If I knew that, maybe I could stop them." He looked toward the window where, even now, 3 black-suited figures stood watching in the perpetual Antarctic summer twilight. "All I know is they want in, or they want us out. Either way, we lose." On my final day, I packed my research materials and personal belongings while Sam prepared the necessary departure reports. The helicopter was scheduled for 1400 hours, weather permitting, always the caveat in Antarctica. I found Sam in the communications room, finalizing my transport confirmation. He looked up as I entered. "All packed?" I nodded. "Just about." He handed me a sealed envelope. "Your exit briefing. Don't open it until you're at least 1,000 miles from here." I tucked it into my jacket pocket. "What's in it?" "Context. Explanations. As much as we have." Sam's voice was level but serious. "And a warning. Another rule. The most important one." He turned to face me fully. "Never talk about what happened here. Not the specific details. Not the patterns. Not the rules. Why not? Because talking about it seems to attract them." His eyes held mine. "People who've discussed the specifics afterward, they reported similar phenomena starting around them wherever they went. Like speaking about it opens a door. You think they'd follow me home?" "I think they'd find you. Eventually." Sam checked his watch. "Your transport should be on schedule. Weather's clear." We spent the next hour going through final protocols. I transferred all my research data to the secure servers, leaving the station with only physical copies of my personal notes. Everything had to be accounted for, documented, signed off. At 13:45, we heard the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. Right on time, Sam helped me carry my gear to the main entrance. We put on our cold weather gear in silence, the routine now so familiar it required no discussion. Outside, the Antarctic landscape stretched vast and white under a pale sky. The approaching helicopter was just a black dot on the horizon, growing larger with each passing minute. "Thank you," I said, turning to Sam, "for keeping me alive." He nodded. "Remember the rules, even after you leave." "What about you?" I asked. "How long until your replacement arrives?" 3 weeks, maybe 4, all alone with them. I'm used to it." He looked out at the snow. "Besides, they usually calm down after someone leaves. The boundaries stabilize again." The helicopter grew louder, its silhouette now clearly visible. Sam extended his hand and we shook, a formal gesture that somehow contained everything we'd experienced together. As the helicopter touched down 50 yards from the entrance, I gathered my bags and moved toward it. The pilot signaled for me to hurry. They never shut down the engines during pickups, minimizing time on the ground. I looked back once I reached the helicopter. Sam stood in the doorway of the station, a solitary figure against the large facility. That's when I noticed them. The black-suited figures had returned. Not 7 this time, but dozens, forming a complete circle around the station perimeter, each one perfectly still, facing inward, watching. I climbed aboard quickly, stowing my gear in the designated compartment. The pilot gave me a thumbs up and began liftoff procedures immediately. Through the window, I saw Sam raise his hand in farewell, then retreat inside the station, closing the heavy door behind him. As we gained altitude, I could see the entire station layout from above: the main building, the atmospheric monitoring equipment, the backup generators. And surrounding it all, the black-suited figures remained in their perfect circle, unmoving even as snow kicked up from the helicopter rotors swirled around them. We banked sharply to the north, and I watched the Antarctic research station shrink beneath us. Sam was down there, alone with those things for another month, following the rules, surviving, waiting for the next researcher to arrive and begin the cycle again.